you for being here. Good evening. On behalf of the Boston Public Art Triennial, my name is Marguerite Winter, and I am the Director of Partnership and Engagement here. And thank you all for joining us this evening. The Triennial is very proud to present the first of this year in our ongoing Let's Talk series, where we bring together knowledge keepers, whether academics, scientists, your local library, musician, to be in conversation with artists and expand the themes of the public art installations and commissions that we produce every year. Today's conversation is going to be where we learn a little bit about the pop-up installation by our artist Heather Kapplow. Kapplow, which if you have not seen, some of it is actually outside. The pearly gates are out there as well. So Better Angels, which is a large-scale work, a new commission, is making its debut here next weekend, June 26th, 27th, and 28th at Atlantic Wharf. So although you're seeing it indoors today, it will actually be outside on the water, and you're going to hear a little bit more information about that today. I don't want to step on our wonderful conversation that we're going to have and leave some time for these amazing panelists that I'm in awe of today. But to give you a little context, Better Angels, a traveling work, is a playful invitation to envision our best selves with fellow participants as witnesses, offer a moment of grace when we fall short, and then during a time of national division and reflections on the aspirations of our nation's founding, the project humorously yet earnestly reminds visitors that democracy has always required us to navigate profound disagreement and work together toward ideals of beyond our lifetimes. As I mentioned, the first installation will be popping up next weekend, and we are still identifying sites for this installation to go throughout the summer and the fall. So if you would like to be a partner and think about a new place where Boston could use a little bit of Better Angels and a little bit of grace for yourselves, please reach out to any of our colleagues that are here today or shoot us a line. Before I introduce our panelists and moderator, I would like to extend gratitude to, again, all of you, but everyone who made this program possible this evening. Of course, thank you to BPX for their generosity, BXP for their generosity, their partnership, and their collaboration throughout this process to make this first unveiling and this conversation possible. I'd also like to thank the Lubin Family Foundation, who is being supportive through all of our pilot programs this year. So you might have noticed we had you all check in, and that's because we are really good about tracking our attendance to see how many of you are coming back to our programs. So we hope to see a lot of you soon. And supporting Let's Talk, as well as our new iteration of Art and Stroll that we're doing. Come see one of those as well. And last but not least, I just really want to thank all of the colleagues at the Triennial for putting this together, especially my colleague Emerson, who is also our tech person this evening and really running this show, so thank you so much. And on to our speakers, and then you'll hear enough about me. From me. First, Jadi Amazi believes that narratives upheld in our public realm should be expanded to represent, honor, and celebrate the experiences, history, and cultures of people who have been historically denied representation in our memorial landscape. As a principal at MASSDesign Group, Jadi leads the Public Memory and Memorials Lab, engaging communities' design projects such as the Emmett Till and Mommy Till Mobley National Monument Project, the Gun Violence Memorial Project, and the Sugarlands 95 Cemetery Revitalization Project. Dan McKanan is the Ralph Waldo Emerson Senior Lecturer at Harvard Divinity School, where he's taught since 2008. He is the author of 6 books on religious movements for social transformation from the early 19th century to present. And Neda Moridpour is a Kurdish-Iranian cultural futurist, artist, and organizer. They create collaborative spaces that center mutual care and visualization of future world building through their community-engaged social art practice. And last but not least, who brings us all together is Heather Kapplow. A self-trained conceptual artist based in the US, Kapplow creates participatory experiences using installation, sound, object, text, engagement, and other strategies to convert audiences into collaborators and complex, hard to answer questions, into tenderly co-held things, invested with transformative collective care. Kapplow has been awarded numerous grants, residencies, and fellowships, and has had work commissioned for galleries, festivals within the United States and international. Now, you're done hearing me talk, and let's get to this wonderful, robust conversation. Thank you so much, and here's to Heather and the team.
Thank you so much, Connie. This is a good volume. And I also want to repeat the gratitude to Emerson for pulling this together. And I also want to thank our brand new public art ambassadors who just finished training yesterday and are here today working already. And there's something really moving about that. Let's see. And I also want to acknowledge how humbling it is to be on the stage with you guys. These people are doing massive things. I'm going to read because I'm better at reading and writing than speaking. Like rebuilding what's tangibly marked as meaningful in our landscapes, holding open portals between the past, present, and future, and nourishing a wide range of uncommon belief practices that try to bring humanity into better alignment with the planet, among other things. These are huge endeavors, and I'm just making balloons. It feels a little bit like sometimes. But, and I'm going to start us off today. So, like, the goal of this conversation is ostensibly to determine what it would take to build heaven on earth, presumably now, not just in a temporary inflatable form, but for real. It feels like a lofty goal for a 90-minute conversation, but I'm going to take the assignment at face value and roll up my sleeves and see how much heaven we can build here today. So I wanted to start before we get into like how we individually or collectively define heaven for the day. I want to sort of like slow us all down and have us all take a moment to close our eyes, like us up here in front of you and you guys out there, and just search around inside of ourselves for a moment for the most tangible little glimmer of heaven feeling that we can find living in our bodies here with us today. And then no rush, but once it emerges, I'd like to ask each one of you up here to just sort of share one word or phrase that describes either a quality of that feeling or where you feel it. For example, twinkly, in my right hand. No rush. Again, like when you're ready, pop it out, but no pressure to say anything before you are. My intention is to just kind of like acknowledge any even tiny bit of heavenliness that might already be on earth and in the room, on the assumption that it's possible we might have to bring heaven to earth like particle by particle. So.
Mine is warmth in my center, at my core.
Flow in my limbs.
Tingling in my stomach. I feel like a little like buzzing around my watch. I'm just gonna take it. Thank you for doing that exercise with me. I just wanted to be really present. So it feels to me, and it's sort of been implied in some of the language around this event, that like one person's heaven is often another person's hell. And in fact, I feel like we're seeing a lot of that in the way that the USA is divided right now, and maybe always has been, as we sort of approach the semi-quincentennial. It's like a heavy feeling. And rather than asking each of you to define heaven, I'd like to ask instead, from the perspective of your work, what are the preconditions for an embodied heaven? Like what would have to be acknowledged, built, or have space made for it that isn't currently fully in place? But actually, I'm going to pause, because we were supposed to have a few minutes to all go around and talk about what we do and show some slides, right? I forgot to do that. Let's
Hey,
do
we
that
can start where you wanna
first. No,
start.
I just I thought that was going to come from these folks, and I realized it didn't. So, Jadi, will you tell us about your work starting down there?
Sure, I'm happy to do so, and that also gives me time to answer that question. So thank you for that. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone.
Hi.
Oh, no, hell no. No. Not on this Tuesday, friends. Let's try that one more time. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you. It's okay. You don't have to be shy. I know y'all didn't want to sit in the front, but you can use your voices and speak. Very happy to be here this evening with you all, so thank you for the invitation. As was stated, I am Jadi Amazi, and I'm a principal at MASS, and I have the distinct pleasure and stress of leading our Public Memory and Memorials Lab, which is a portfolio of work that is focused on spatializing memory and asking questions of how we can expand narratives in the public realm. MASS is a nonprofit design collective. It does not stand for Massachusetts. It stands for Model of Architecture Serving Society. And so I am based here in our Boston studio, but we also have a team in Poughkeepsie, New York, a team in Ogepoge, which is more commonly referred to as Santa Fe, New Mexico, and a team in Kigali, Rwanda, as well as folks working internationally remotely. And each of our teams are part of this nonprofit design collective. And so the nonprofit structure allows us to leverage philanthropic support in order to support research, catalyst projects, and overall systems change through the work that we do in service of other organizations. So we're at the intersection of design and social justice through our work. At the core of this work are these series of design labs, and there are 8 of them total, and there's different topic areas for each lab. For example, we have a maternal newborn health lab that is focused on exactly what it sounds like, and ensuring that there's proper health care and services and support for those that are birthing, that are being birthed, and that love on and support them. We also have a Deaf and Disability Design Justice Lab, which is focused on universal design and pushing the boundaries of that even further, as well as a few others. The lab that I lead, as I mentioned, is the Public Memory and Memorials Lab. And for that work, we are primarily focused on memorials, monuments, spaces of memory, and really focused on looking for ways to expand, as I said before, the narratives that are being told to us through the public realm. I think we can all in this room agree and understand that our current memorial landscape is very limited. It tells a very specific, prescribed, limited, and therefore harmful story about who we are and what we collectively believe in. And so our work is focused on blowing that up and expanding it and challenging it and questioning it. So we are working in service of organizations, other nonprofit organizations, other mission-aligned folks to help them to bring about these ideas around spatializing certain histories, memories, and so forth in the public realm. I am trained formally in architecture. My passion is spoken word poetry and community organizing, and so this role is a serendipitous overlap of those two things. I did not study public memory, I did not study anthropology, I did not study monuments and memorials, so most days I have no idea what I'm doing, or so it feels, but I'm deeply rooted in these ideas of how can we make space where it has historically been denied, how can we take up space and ensure that our histories, our contributions, and our collective efforts are being celebrated and acknowledged for future generations. And so some of the projects that you've been seeing here on the screen are examples of the work that we're doing, and I'm not going to speak specifically to them. It might come up in the Q&A, but what it is an example of the different scales that we work at. And so on one hand, we're working at the scale of a sculpture, a singular sculpture, with a partner that wants to honor a very specific singular history. And on the other hand, we're working at the scale of 72 acres, where a partner is trying to capture and reflect, centuries of compounded and complicated stories and histories. And so we're working with artists, with educators, with government entities, with all sorts of community partners at various scales of design, whether it's landscape design, architectural design, memorial design, systems change and design. We also work in the scale of kind of curricula, if you will, different ways of understanding that our histories and our stories are being communicated to us in the public realm through many different channels. And there's an opportunity for us to challenge and question how those stories have been limited and what the possibilities are for expanding them. So I will stop there and be happy to answer any questions that come up through the conversation or otherwise, but that's in short what I have the pleasure of doing at Mass.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Heather and Emerson, for making this happen. And it's really exciting to be here because I'm the one of these things that's not like the others. I'm not an artist, and I don't really operate in the art world, but I've been invited here. I'm not exactly sure why, because I am someone who studies religion, so perhaps studies heaven in that regard as a teacher at Harvard Divinity School, and also because much of my work has focused on intentional communities, communes, utopias, places that are trying to create spaces here on Earth that are different from the norm, perhaps closer to the ideal, perhaps not. I also have a project, and this connects very much with a lot of what Jadi was just sharing, on the process by which the people of Boston, beginning about 150 years ago, decided that it was important to preserve wild spaces, forested spaces, not just far away, but close enough to the city that ordinary city residents could experience connection to species other than themselves. I'm talking about spaces like Middlesex Fells, the Blue Hills, Beaver Brook, and so I think what I'll be bringing to this conversation is thinking about 3 different kinds of places. Places of worship, synagogues, churches, temples, utopian communities, communes, and then finally various forms of parks, and the process by which people can use those spaces to create a pathway to something transformative, something ideal, perhaps something heavenly. And I think I'll save how that might happen for when you bring us back to your first question.
Hi everyone, my name is Neda Moridpour. I'm an Iranian Kurdish artist and organizer and educator. My work is mostly concerned with social justice and how to use art as a tool to either raise awareness or engage people in social justice issues. I'm currently teaching at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts at Tufts University and Tisch College of Civic Life, and trying to do the kind of community organizing that I'm doing through my artistic practice in academic spaces, which is not really easy right now. But my practice is mostly collective. I'm the co-founder of 3 artist collectives, so I mostly work with other artists and scholars and musicians. One of them is Part Collective, where we create books. We publish books and work on animation, short animation series. The other one is Louder Than Words, where we work on basically work around animal rights, women's rights, LGBTQIA rights. And the most recent collective that I've been working with is the Hamdel Futurist Collaborative that I co-founded with my friend and colleague Rasheen Fanandij, who teaches at Emerson College. And we're currently working on a project with the city of Boston as part of the Monument Initiative. So one of my, the most recent research and practice that I've been kind of developing is archiving the latest feminist movement in Iran, which is called Jinjian Azadi in Kurdish and Woman Life Freedom in English, that happened in 2022. And as the war has ended just recently in Iran, it's even more important to preserve these performances and rituals. So the archive holds more than 10,000 reiterative performances, rituals, poetry, slogans, political graphics that have been kind of generated and are most kind of, the goal of the archive is to create a transnational solidarity, most importantly feminist solidarity, that kind of links the first world and the third world countries kind of, and how we can learn from embodying these gestures and kind of using our bodies to transfer knowledge versus language or other tools. And so the Monument Initiative is also part of that. We're bringing some of these archival materials and creating digital monuments in the city of Boston, and engage with the activists here in Boston to kind of link the her stories. So the project is called Interwoven Her Stories, and that's currently ongoing. And I'm flattered to be here with you all today. Thank you for being here today.
See what I was saying about these people? Anyways, you guys are all doing very incredible things, and I'm just going to show two pictures from two projects. One was I'm sharing them because I feel like they both involve sort of visions of heaven on earth that I've had. This one is called Validated, and it's sort of the precursor to what Better Angels is doing. It was a speculative futurist city department in the city of Boston, but in theory it was all around the country where people were validated around concerns that, their feelings that they weren't seen as the way they wanted to be seen, and they filled out a form and then read their forms to each other. It's a very similar model to what Better Angels will do, and then they're thus validating one another, but also being witnessed by an official whose job it was to keep people in a constant state of validation, so their validation wouldn't expire and they wouldn't be tempted to be tyrannical. So it was celebrating I think 10 years tyranny-free in the U.S., starting here in Boston. And then the other project is from 10 years ago. It was called Ovation, and it was set in Fenway Park. This was sort of if you look at the bottom, you can see a little bit of the green, and people could walk with loud applause coming at them that was recorded from the stage of a real major concert, and walk to these very warm footlights and just be cheered for as if they had done something fantastic and deserved a standing ovation. And it was incredibly moving to let everyone have that experience that's usually just reserved for people who are special in some way. It's really nice for everyone to get to feel that level of specialness. There's no reason we shouldn't. So in my ideal world, this happens whenever we need it, just like being validated does. So that's it. And now I will read from my list of questions. But you already heard that one, so maybe I'll jump to a different one. Unless you're excited to answer. Is anyone excited to answer that one, or was it too big? You want to answer? Okay, so I'll read it again. I'm not going to read the one person's heaven is often another person's hell piece too much, because that's intense. But from the perspective of your work, what are the preconditions for an embodied heaven on earth? What must be acknowledged, built, have space made for it that isn't currently fully in place?
If I can go first, because your two projects basically set the stage for how I would answer that question. And what's really necessary in the work that I do is we have to be able to see the divinity in each other. We have to be able to see the value in each other. I think a major challenge that our public memory landscape presents us with is the devaluation of others. And there's a very singular narrative that has been forced upon us for generations about who matters and whose contributions matter. And we, I would hope, in this room know that there's far more truths to that. There are layers and upon layers of who has created the the world that we currently live in, the environments that we currently live in. And so I think this weaponized erasure that we unfortunately all have been subjected to has to be undone, has to be course corrected, and the way to do that is to accept the divinity in each and every person, and to accept that this person has value by default of existing on this here earth, let alone for their contributions, let alone for their productivity, but by the fact that they are breathing the same air that you are breathing, they matter. If we could start there, it would make my work so much easier. We'll try to do it a little bit here today. Thank you.
Yeah, when I think about places of worship, utopian communities, parks, I think there are two different ways that people try to build heaven on earth. One way assumes that heaven isn't on earth, and what you're trying to build is a pathway out of earth. So if you think about a medieval cathedral that's built very vertically to get everyone's gaze looking upward. Or if you think about some of the intentional communities that have been created in this country, where somebody read a book, maybe it was Looking Backward by William Bellamy, or Waldo 2 by B.F. Skinner, and they said, we have to make a community exactly like that. Or maybe you had a park and you thought, well, you know, the trees that were growing in Middlesex Fells 180 years ago had all sprouted up from stumps. And some of the landscape architects at the time said, stump-sprouted trees, not very cool. Let's pull them up and plant new, better trees from seeds. So that's one way. Try to get out of the world that you're in. The other way is to go deeper into the world just the way you have it. So at the beginning of the 20th century, a lot of people said, hey, let's put gymnasia in our churches. Let's put classes, classrooms where people can learn job skills in our churches. Let's create people's actual needs in church spaces. Or two of the intentional community movements that I study are the Catholic Worker, which was created during the Great Depression, when people said, hey, let's bring together the people who are suffering the most in this economic crisis and see what kind of life together we can just let emerge from being together. The other community I study is called Camp Hill, and it began when a group of people who'd had to flee Nazi-occupied Vienna found themselves in Scotland and decided they would partner up with children with intellectual disabilities. So two groups of people who'd been cast out from society in different ways decided, let's see what we can create together. And it became an international network of communities. Or, what happens when you try to create a park in a place that has been very disrupted, in a place that has been a toxic waste site or something else, and see if you can bring more biodiversity back to that place. And I think it's pretty obvious which path I prefer, but I know the goal of your project is to keep the dialogue open, so just say, maybe there's something to be learned on the other side as well.
It sounds like you're saying the precondition is definitely having a vision, at least,
Yeah.
even if there are three different models.
Yeah, I'm gonna maybe explain my thoughts through Persian culture and Sufism. There's this musical instrument that's called ney, that is created from sort of a bamboo kind of a plant. And there's a Rumi poem that it's very famous in Iranian culture. I think it goes back to what you were saying, Neda, which is kind of a material meaning and understanding of that separation. The poem goes, بشنو از نی چون حکایت میکند از جدایی ها شکایت میکند, which means listen to the flute because it's speaking from the separation, and that the melody that is coming out of the flute is basically that other space that is being created that talks about love. But it kind of, it brings back this idea of acknowledging that separation. And once you acknowledge that separation, like the flute wouldn't necessarily agree to create the melody with the person who's kind of using, who's using it as a tool. But it comes, how love and kind of creating a heaven as a space comes from this idea of acknowledging the separation. And then what are some of the tools that we use to create that space, to create that connection. So for me, it's always, first of all, creating that space where the unheard voices are being heard. And whatever that we're using as a tool, either it's a dialogue or art as a tool, as an, or a musical instrument, basically in this scenario. But that's for me, creating a community and space for people to feel comfortable to contribute. Yeah, which is kind of going back to your installations, the idea of looking at heaven as a state of presence versus a destination or a space.
I'm turning my mic on and off because its battery is a little bit low, so I'm trying to preserve it. Let's see, where do I want to take us next? Well, I was thinking that one of the things that all of your work has in common is a sort of, let's see how I phrased it here, when I was writing instead of thinking. Common thread is sort of that the possibility of a better world than the one we currently find ourselves within, and that doesn't mean that it's not already here, but the possibility of it being the most obvious, unmistakable state, I guess. In all of your work seems to be really deeply intertwined with collectivism, whether it's activism or community-based processes. Can you talk a little bit about the heavenliness to be found in humans working towards ideals together?
I'm not going to keep going first.
First, when I turn that way. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I can actually speak to this. I think it's the final line of Dorothy Day's autobiography, The Long Loneliness, is that heaven is a banquet and life is a banquet too, even with a crust, when there is companionship. And this is the idea of bringing together people experiencing poverty and achieving a sense of heaven on earth, even in the midst of poverty, through companionship, through sharing, through dialogue, but also breaking bread together. And that idea, and I think a lot of what we've been talking about, I hear an echo there of this line from Paradise Lost. The mind is its own place and can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven, which kind of alerts us to the possibility that heaven is always hiding, even in the places that seem least heavenly. Now, it's Satan's line in Paradise Lost, and the reason a lot of modern people think of it as a good line, it's not because Milton told us to, but because William Blake and other people during the Romantic period said, hey, Satan's really the star of this show. But I think the difference, right, between the way Milton's Satan turns hell into heaven and the way Dorothy Day turns hell into heaven is that Satan says, it's all in my head. And Dorothy Day says, it's between us.
Does anyone else have anything? I'll ask a different question if no one else has something that comes to mind. But.
I can maybe, to kind of continue with that conversation. What I learned through my work, maybe I should speak through my own experience, is that I kind of started with the archive that we're kind of which is an open access archive, and people in Iran are contributing to it. One thing that I learned was how, I grew up in Iran and I moved here in 2009, so it's been 17 years. But what I've learned from political activism and kind of community organizing is how to use my body as a site for rehearsing the future that I want to see. And one thing that I learned through the Woman Life movement, obviously I wasn't able to go back, but when I kind of learned through witnessing, so this idea of what you witness, and when you learn from other people organizing and kind of showing the future that they want to see. And this is a community that I belong to, right? It's not like I'm not an outsider from a community, but how do I understand the knowledge or the future that they want to see through the performances that they're kind of rehearsing over and over again. So there are all these gestures that are being repeated over and over again. And I learned the importance of rehearsing and repeating that future, and how people have been, this is the first time this is happening in Iran, obviously post-revolution, since 1979, political activism has changed a lot, but this is the first time that people have been using performance and visual art as a language to show the possibility of their future. So that kind of shifted something in my understanding of community organizing, and how to create space, and how to kind of, it was based on who's not there and what's not being included, and kind of shifting, combining, maybe shifting would not be the right word, but combining that with the future that we want to see. And how do we rehearse that, and how do we perform that, or how do we repeat that until it actually happens? Yeah. I really love that.
These gestures as seeds, it's just like, I think both of you are actually doing things where you're sort of holding out, or all of you, holding out like something that with enough exposure starts to override what seems like the impossible.
I'll just add one thing to the conversation. So something that's really important in the work that we're doing with our partners through the lab is resisting this urge to concentrate on singular hero worship, which is something that often occurs in our memorial landscape, right? There's always one victor, there's always one name, there's always one person that triumphed in this, that, and the third way. And the reality is that there's always collective action behind any movement, behind any effort, behind any change that we've seen. And being intentional about resisting the singular hero worship and instead centering the collective action then gives us the opportunity to reflect on what our individual contributions are for a greater good. And so finding ways to tell these stories and to make sure that the names that need to be named are named and celebrated and honored, but not in a way that takes away from the collective community power. I think any one of us knows that there is likely nothing that you have accomplished in your life on your own. Someone did something to support you in that effort. Even if all they did was help you find the coffee machine, they still helped you to do the thing that you eventually came to do. And if we remember that, I think it is a lot easier and of course more powerful for us then to consider what our communal and collective possibilities are, rather than continuing to succumb to this individualistic approach to life, which then moves us further away from being able to see the divinity in each other.
All perfect answers.
So let's see. Some of you come in contact with very dark aspects of humanity, or human experiences in your work. How do you reconcile the darkness and cruelty that humanity is capable of with our capacity for the kind of goodness to one another that a heaven on earth would require? Where could that darkness go? What would be the right way to process or free ourselves of it if earth became heavenized, fully heavenized? Yeah, I'm not expecting you to know the answer, but just if there's anything that comes to mind, or that your work has shown you as a place for moving that, or moving that stuff, or converting that stuff. I'm not sure what the right language is. Where does it go when there's heaven, I guess? When the divinity becomes, or the heavenness becomes the prominent thing.
I don't think it's ever gonna go away. That's kind of unfortunately where I'm at. To me, it's this acceptance of, that there's always gonna be divinity in one way or another. Again, this is kind of me trying to understand the history of my country and how this has been happening and repeating over and over again for 1,400 years. At least, or thousands of years, and how we have a short historical memory, that we forget that people have always fought for freedom, always fought for justice in one way or another. That has always been divinity. So to me, is this actually just accepting that that's kind of the reality, and then how do you empower the positive kind of, the future imagination, and how do you work around kind of accepting divinity and bringing people together and create conversations and awareness. But that's kind of where I'm at with my work. Obviously, going through hundreds and thousands of, documents and photos and narratives of people getting shot on the street or being arrested, tortured in prison, mothers losing their loved ones, fathers losing their children. But there's this one, actually maybe that might be kind of a good example. There's this group of mothers in Iran that they're called Mothers for Justice. And what they've been doing is that through basically when their kids have been tortured and killed for, very simple requests of having the right to not wear a hijab or having the right to go to a party with their friends, so basic human rights. And they've been imprisoned and tortured and killed. But what the parents have been doing, which is very interesting, is that they've been dancing on the burial sites and actually asking people to dance with them. So there's this rejection of the kind of sadness and hopelessness and sorrow that the regime wants them to feel, and actually rejecting that. So what I've learned, again, through my work and my research, is how, this is all going to be there. But how do we always consistently focus on this productive resistance strategy that would hopefully create, make it better and better over the years. Sorry, that was too long.
Actually, there's not a specific length of answer we're looking for here. I think you're fine.
Yeah, I think thinking about this, I want to talk about two memorials in Boston. I'm curious how this will connect with some of your work, Shadi. And before I name them, let me just say, that I spent a lot of time thinking about why we in the United States don't do some of the things that have been done in Germany to build memorials to the atrocities that have happened here that are so ubiquitous that you can't, in many German cities you can't walk, a quarter of a mile without seeing a Holocaust memorial. And we also live on a site of genocide, and we don't have that experience. So two places in Boston where you can have a little bit of that experience. And I'm not looking these up as perfect examples of memorialization, just ones I want to think with. First in Medford, there's a place called the Slave Wall. The Brooks family in Medford was one of the major enslaving families, really in all of New England. And at the beginning of the 20th century, one of the descendants of that family gave to the public a wall that had built by one of the people that his family had enslaved, and just the land around it, and without even explaining like why he was giving this. So it's just like this undigested reminder, hey, you know, this is a site of enslavement. And the other place is Deer Island, and if you take off from Logan Airport, you see these big egg-like waste processing structures. But Deer Island arguably is also the place where the concentration camp was invented during so-called King Philip's War, the war against McKanan, a group of indigenous people who were not, in fact, the enemy in the war, just other indigenous people were removed from their homes and placed on Deer Island without adequate food for the winter. And Deer Island was used for many, many other things in the 300 years that followed, culminating in its current use as a water treatment facility. And there's at least a little bit of acknowledgement about, I don't think it uses the word concentration camp, but a little bit of acknowledgement in the signage there. But again, just a place you can go and be conscious of the work that all of us have to do to undo the harm that has been inflicted in our spaces.
Yeah, I think going back to what you were saying, my original answer to the question was going to be something about my son, because that's always my answer. And you know, a lot of times when I talk about the work that I do and I give a lecture, inevitably somebody asks this question. They say, wow, your work is so heavy. How do you push through? How do you keep doing it? And I have two answers to that. It's my son, because I'm literally building the world that I want him to flourish in, and therefore your children and your grandchildren and your siblings to flourish in. And then the other answer to that question is our partners, because our partners who are rooted in these histories and rooted in these stories that they're wanting to tell, they are in it day in and day out. They are descendants of it, they are carriers of it, and they get up every day with all the strength and all the love and all the tenacity one could possibly muster up. And how dare I not be able to show up to match that energy? And so when you said, like, where does it go and how does it exist? I think it gets swallowed by joy. I think it gets consumed by our persistence to resist through love and laughter and possibility and imagination, because it's not going to go anywhere, unfortunately. And so we have to meet and match and exceed it with something more and something else. And I think of my son, who's 4 and therefore running my life, and his capacity and his ability to just stay in joy. It does not matter what the situation is, what the day is, what tantrum he just went through and carried us all through with him. He immediately returns to joy and to the possibility of a good time and smiles and laughter and all these things. And I'm like, if I can just channel that, I can do it all. And so I think the point that you made about these mothers who will not succumb to the conditioning that the regime would have us be subjected to, I think is our most powerful force in response to the perpetual evil and ugly and darkness that is going to exist.
Thank you. Thank you all so far for your incredibly generous answer. Let's see. Okay, this is like a little bit of a simpler one, but also ties into the project structure, actually. If you come to visit on the 26th to the 28th here in this very neighborhood, What is giving you each the most hope for heaven-like conditions on earth right now? Moment of silence if you need to for that one. Is anyone else seeing anything that's like, well, I think you're off the hook because your story about your son is pretty much the answer to that.
Go back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a similar story. I have a 6-year-old kid, so very similar. I think for me, hope is this understanding of how there's only one of us. And also finding simple language to explain all of this. And as we were saying, I do the same. I try to explain my work and what I teach and what I do and why we can't go back to see our family, to our kids in a simple way. And that makes it even more complicated for me. But there's this beauty in thinking about things in a simple way. Like this idea of explaining to a 6-year-old that there's only one of us, and how they receive it, and what they do about it, and like the next morning how they take care of the plants in our backyard, and saying, well, would they feel the same pain that we feel? So kind of my hope is in this understanding of interconnectedness between humans, animals, and plants, and every creature on this earth. But also going back to simple, basic daily routines. I think that's how I'm keeping my sanity and keeping my hopes up. Aside from practicing what hope looks like, or rejecting the darkness by accepting or rehearsing the joy. But also simple routines and kind of, simple routines, but also this understanding of the next generation, how, I guess because, in my case, because I had a kid, I don't kind of allow myself to give up in that way. But yeah.
I was thinking I didn't have an answer, and then I remembered, I have an answer, and it's exactly what happened immediately before I walked over to this event. It's a little bit complicated, so bear with me. So I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and this week is our National General Assembly, which is happening online this year, which is how I'm able to be there and here at this event almost at the same time. And one of the things we do at our General Assembly is make statements, what we call actions of immediate witness, about things that are going wrong in the world right now that we want Unitarian Universalists to act collectively on. And one of the delegates was really eager for us to do an action of immediate witness about the concentration camps that are sponsored by our government right now, ICE detention centers, and call on Unitarian Universalists to stand in solidarity with people who are being held in those concentration camps, particularly a group of people at a place called Delaney Hall who are having a hunger strike in protest of their circumstances. But this delegate crafted the text without talking to the organizers there, and called for us, thousands of Unitarian Universalists, to do something that might actually be counterproductive for the organizing. And this was a dilemma because we couldn't approve the thing in the form that it was given because it might be counterproductive, but we really wanted to do something. And some people got together and said, we can create a substitute motion that will solve this problem, and then that got ruled out of order because of parliamentary procedures. And I was so mad. We always shoot ourselves in the foot around this kind of thing. This is so, I don't know how many of you know Unitarian Universalists, but it's the kind of thing that Unitarian Universalists do. And we were, I was one of the people so mad at ourselves. And then just before I had to start walking over here, some other people, instead of being mad, decided to try one more time to find another little parliamentary loophole that would allow us to say collectively exactly the thing that we clearly wanted to say collectively, which is that we need to speak out, and we need to speak out in conversation with people who are most impacted by the harm.
I have just a quick point that's far less serious than what either of these folks have offered. But I was walking with colleagues today for lunch, and we were talking about all the excitement that we're seeing in the city around FIFA, and I know we all have different opinions about it, but watching this like clash of cultures, or it's not even a clash, but like this mixing of cultures is really fun. And one thing that my colleague was talking about is, you know, the other day over the weekend, she was going somewhere and there were a bunch of guys driving down the street in the slingshots, like the really low to the ground, three-wheel, open to the air cars. And they're flying down the street, there's 3 of them, and they have music blasting, as they typically do in the slingshots for the summer. But the music that they're playing is Scottish music. And so they pass by a group of Scottish guys and they go wild. They're like cheering, dancing, taking videos and taking pictures. And she was like, and the guys in the slingshots were black guys, and she's like, I assume they're from here, from Boston. And she's like, it was just this really beautiful moment where, like, how else would these 2 groups of folks have connected if not for that? And I think those intersectional moments of just like, I see you and I appreciate you seeing me, are moments where we can have a little bit of heaven on earth, or a little bit of earth in heaven, I don't know. But.
I'm waiting for the mic. Perfect. Okay, I think I'm gonna go off script a little bit here. I've been very scripty. We're supposed to have questions in 15 minutes, but I want to have them now. And then I'll like wrap us up for a few minutes at the end in a different way than I planned. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Does anyone have a question? Oh my God, there's no questions. Jane. Do we want to put Jane on the mic? Yeah. Okay.
Really quite loud. All right, here we go. Okay. You're welcome.
This has been so fantastic. I really have enjoyed and have so much to think about. Thank you. I'm curious about the word heaven. I think this is mostly to you, but actually I don't think exclusively, because maybe you wondered too. Like, why heaven, not utopia, or some other word that I haven't thought of? Like, what is heaven? What is it about heaven?
It's funny because that was question 4. We're talking about heaven today rather than utopia. Does heaven require spirituality? How is how is heavenliness intertwined with the human experience of the spiritual? And then I was like, I'm not going to ask that question. I'll let Jane ask it. I did not name this talk, but it was named by Emerson, I believe, right? So that might be an Emerson question, but I think also because this project, in case anyone's unclear, we're not talking about Christian heaven. I know it looks a lot like Christian heaven in The Simpsons, for example, but it's sort of the pop cultural version of heaven, American Christian heaven, but not I wasn't raised with that heaven. I don't really know anything about it except what I've seen in cartoons and movies. And so the heaven of the installation is that heaven, the American cartoon movie version. And so my guess is that the language for this talk comes from that. But I think because divinity has been coming up a lot, it is worth talking about how does using the word heaven change the conversation from using the word utopia or ideal world, or I don't know what the other options are. But.
I answer that? No,
I'm not an answerer of questions, I'm a questioner. Anyone else?
I guess it's a good chance for me to put on my historian of religion hat and say that, though, I mean, it's certainly true that heaven is also not necessarily my lingo, personally, but thinking historically, one of the fabulous things about heaven is that really is more of a pop cultural category than a theological category, because it is one of these things that in every generation people stuff full of whatever they want to stuff it full of, without very much regard to the official teaching of their particular religious tradition. And one of the more recent iterations of heaven imagery came in the 19th century in this country, when people with Christian roots started doing a thing that many non-Christians had been doing all along, which is talking to their ancestors and imagining, heaven as this kind of great reunion with the ancestors. Which is a much more democratizing thing to aim for than perfect alignment with the rules of an abstract divinity. So I guess that's just to say, yes, lean into the cartoon version. There might be really something important to learn there.
And I actually will say that even though I don't have like a clear sense of a specific religious heaven, as I've been doing this project, and even today at the beginning of this conversation, I'm starting to have a sense of like heavenliness, like what feels heavenly to me. And I think that language comes more from like when someone's like, "Oh, that is the most heavenly cake I've ever had," But it's starting to feel like a meaningful word in that sense. This sort of like really rich, emotionally rich, like love rich, beauty rich, gratitude rich, slightly gold-tinged, sparkliness that I didn't have for that word before, so that I can only just say that it's starting to mean something to me, and it didn't used to. Or it used to just be cartoon heaven, and now it's sort of also like a texture in my life and day, and that's fantastic. Anyone else have a question? Why Morgan? And then perhaps, I think I know everyone's name in this room. Go ahead, Lloyd.
You can go ahead.
You can go ahead. I feel like she.
Okay.
Hi, thank you guys. This has been such a wonderful and engaging and joyful and funny and also sad and hard talk. I am thinking a lot, Neda, about how you talked about these like routines and rituals. I love the idea of like rehearsing heaven until it manifests as real, and I think Shadi, you spoke to that a little bit too in terms of like watching your son return to joy in that way. So I've been thinking about like, it's easier said than done to be like, I'm gonna bring this like joyful moment of heaven into my routine and start to practice it and see if it shows up here on earth. And Heather, I think your piece is like this big inflatable interruption to what we typically see on the harbor when we're walking down the street. So I'm curious if any of you can speak to like, how do you go from being like, we should rehearse this, to rehearsing it, either for yourself or with other people? How do you make that jump?
It's a great question. To me, well, I think I come from a culture that's all about rituals. Like we have rituals on the first day of spring. We have ritual for the last Wednesday of the year where we jump up, over fire. But there are all these really simple, and they're all performance-based. Like they're all kind of you're using your body and the materials that have a meaning to you, and kind of, I think it's very similar to other cultures. But what's really interesting is that when I moved here, the idea of community activism or community organizing changed for me. Because, obviously here it's a more kind of an individualistic kind of an environment, right? Everyone's kind of living your life, going to work. There's a lack of a sense of a community. And there's, you have to find spaces or find your community to connect to. Versus in my home country, it's everywhere. It's on the streets, it's in a bakery that you go everywhere, you're part of that community. So this idea of creating those rituals for myself again, recreating them for myself again, and introducing my kid to those rituals was really interesting because I feel like religions, obviously, you know more than me, but all these rituals and religions have been kind of created to guide us, right? This reminder that there's not only you who's struggling, there are other people who are also struggling, right? And how can we struggle together, and how can we rehearse or perform, not in a performance kind of a stage performance thing, but how do we embody hope? How do we embody resistance? How do we use our body to get there, right? And I think from the recent, feminist political movement in Iran, I learned that obviously not a lot of people know about it, and one of the reasons that I wanted to create work about it and archive all these materials, because people were actually doing that on the streets. There was a woman who in 2007 went on a utility box and held her scarf over just a stick and stood there until she got arrested because of not covering her hair. But that was a performance, that was a political performance that she planned. Obviously it got kind of, sidetracked in the media saying that she's just a political activist and this was like a protest. But then since 2009, people started repeating that performance. There are thousands of images of women going up on utility boxes and holding their hijabs on a stick. Every week, every day, every year, it's still going on. It's been 17 years, right? So 17 years, and then on the news you hear, well, women are on the street protesting hijab, and this is happening in 2022, and a girl died or was killed by the morality police, but this has been going on for 17 years. And when we got together and started kind of creating this work, is that this is exactly what we're doing it, because it's this lack of knowledge of what does it mean to learn something from someone, and then repeating it ritualistically, actually believing it, what embodying it could bring, even if it's gonna take us 17 years. But this is just a small gesture, like another small gesture, like a small example of just how one gesture ended up changing the women's rights in Iran. Now women are not wearing hijab on the street. After 17 years of, these kind of small performances here and there, obviously thousands of people are getting killed and tortured and in prison. But thinking about embodying it in a different way, I think that's how I understand rituals, in a personal, social, but also political way. How do we understand our bodies as a site for resistance? How do we practice joy in the face of all the darkness that is happening? But also, how do we ritualistically rehearse the future that we want to see? Either if that's one drawing a day with your kid about your neighborhood and what community means to them. I don't know. I think it's kind of like an open-ended, personalized thing. I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah, too long explaining what my thoughts were about it.
Again, a perfect answer. Like heaven perfect. Does anyone else have a question? Oh, Claudia, I see you in the back.
Hi. My question, first it's more of an observation, because I've been thinking a lot about using enchantment as method in my work. And I've been kind of deep into Jane Bennett's work. I don't know if anyone knows her work. She's a political theorist. And it's more about how we're in such a disenchanted society that I wonder, for me, growing up in like post-communist Albania, there was no sort of idea of heaven, and so enchantment was the thing for me. And I think about this temporary immobilization of thought when I think of heaven, and that comes from another sort of like philosopher, but I wonder if for any of you, there is this momentary pause to be able to experience the quote-unquote heavenly, to fully be present necessitates almost like all the other senses to be paused.
I'm going to answer that question with like a very short exercise at the end of everything else we have to do. Is that fair? Does anyone else have an answer?
I don't know if it's an answer or a question to your question, but for me, heavenly experiences are when none of my senses are paused and they're actually all activated at once. So there are these moments where there's just so much presence, there's so much joy, there's so much possibility, there's so much pleasure that all of me feels alive and on, and that is the closest I think I've ever felt to a heaven, and that to me is also enchanting in a way. And so I guess I'm curious for you how or why it's the inverse, if I'm allowed to ask a question back to somebody else, because I really want to understand that.
It's allowed, I've decided, as the moderator. Hopefully you can also answer a question.
Well, I apologize, I don't want to take up this much real estate. I actually will say I thought this was going to be a workshop where I was like, I can't wait to talk about my ideas of heaven. So I guess now I get to do it. I think because we've diluted senses to like 5 things, and for me that's not the 5 things, and maybe that's probably the answer is that we haven't been able to at least yet fully categorize our, the full potential of senses, including what I'm very obsessed with, which is scent and smell, and the categorization of that in the mind is so deeply ingrained in our sort of what do we call it, the caveman brain, like so it's for me, I feel like all the senses are paused because some other sense that there's no word for is maybe like alive.
Yeah, on this question of enchantment, I just want to make a quick recommendation, advertisement, I guess. So I've mentioned the Middlesex Fells, and in case anybody doesn't know Middlesex Fells, it's a forested park north of the city in Medford and Malden and Winchester and Stone. And the Friends of the Fells, the sort of community organization that supports that park, sponsors walks in the woods. And some of the people who lead these walks, I wish I could name them, but I can't. But some of them are really good at a way of walking through the woods where you might go at a pace of about 1/4 of a mile an hour, because everybody is kind of stopping and noticing really small things. Just different little bits of fungi, or maybe some tiny insect. Somehow they have this, multiple senses, some other senses going on that people register that, oh, there's this particular insect over there. And let's all stop and say what we know about this insect and watch what the insect does. And then we go another 6 feet and somebody else notices something. So highly recommend that.
Anyone else have a pressing question? All right.
I'll ask one.
Yeah, Matthew, go ahead.
It's just going to be a either or sort of answer, if I can ask it correctly.
So the things that I do are very much rooted in history and how space has been created around us. And the more and more that I learn about history, the more comfort I get with my own being. And my question is to the panel is, does your greater understanding of history as you learn more and more bring you more joy or more pain?
Joy.
Both.
That's all the answer.
Yeah, I'm gonna plead the fifth. That's the only other answer available. All right, so at the beginning of this, I had us, I'm gonna lead us through a little thing and then I'm gonna have Emerson give us our final walk us out language. At the beginning of this, I asked everyone to sort of like find a little heaven inside of themselves, see if it was there. It was, you know, I invited you to share yours, but I was hoping everyone else also had their own. I was going to end with that, but I actually have decided to go in a different direction, which is, no, but first I also want to say how amazing it was to be here with you. It was incredible. It was heaven. So a couple times, I don't know how it's going to work with a microphone. Maybe I won't use the microphone once I'm done telling you what we're going to do. A couple times I've had experiences where like people made nonverbal sounds together. Hi, we're all going to make some nonverbal sounds together. That's what's coming next. And I like it because it joins us together and we listen to each other, and also because this project was in my dreamiest dreams had a sound component which it doesn't really have in the way that I, just can't do everything. So maybe we can do a sound component here. And also I'm thinking like the best places I've ever experienced this have been in sort of gay-led spaces, which doesn't mean anything specific, but I'm just putting it out there as somebody to like be grateful to. The gays are good at this somehow, even though it doesn't seem obvious. Yeah. And the sort of most famous person for doing this specific exercise and who developed it is a gay hero, not with us on the earth anymore, but Paulina Laveras, a sound artist. Yeah, a lot of you folks probably know who she is. Was. And so basically the principle is like one person kind of makes a humming sound, and then anyone who hears it tries to match a humming sound to their humming sound, and then like everybody tries to match the humming sound they hear until we're done. So yeah.
Can we do it every sculpture in circle?
Well, we could. I don't know what the rules are.
But why don't we do it here and then we can do it again if we really want to?
Okay. We'll do it with you, Lonnie. I really love that I know everyone's name in this room. We'll do it with you, Lonnie, one more time out there, anyone who wants to join us. But let's do it in here. Actually, there's a special reason to do it in here, which is I was so happy when I found out we were in this room because I've been to, not like hundreds, but at least 4 or 5 like community meetings here where people were trying to like make changes or offer opportunities or teach about things. And so it feels like a special space to me. I was like afraid that this was going to be some kind of like stadium, and it's this room that I've spent a ton of time in already, and that was a really nice thing. So I kind of want to leave some vibrations in this room because there were some here when I got here, and then we can go out and do it again out there and see if we can make the bubble move. So I don't think it is supposed to be done with a microphone, so I'm going to turn the microphone off and I'll start a hum, and then everybody else can pick it up. And it's not like one person at a time. We just like all make humming sounds until we don't feel like it anymore. Does that sound cool? All right then.
thank you so much, Heather, Neda, Dan, Jati, and all of you for making this place and evening such a little piece of heaven right here. Here, hold on one second. I am both speaking and slides person, and I do have one more thing. Yes, thank you for being here. Okay. Before we depart, I just want to encourage you to do two things upon your departure from this room into the next realm, which hopefully is to see those pearly gates and bubbly clouds outside. The first is we always love to hear from you about your experiences at any of our triennial programs, all of which are free and open to the public. We've been holding these talk series sort of as we have work on display for the past couple of years. We're really thrilled that you all could be here for the kickoff of 2026 Let's Talk. If you care to leave some feedback for us, we deeply appreciate it. We want you to keep coming to programs. We want to know what makes them special to you. And second, the arguably more exciting thing is Better Angels is popping up at Atlantic Wharf next weekend, which is really exciting, and I really hope to see you all there. We'll be popping up on June 26th, 27th, and 28th for the full Better Angels experience right here at Atlantic Wharf, just on the other side of the Smith and Walensky on that patch of beautiful green grass. I just can't wait for you all to be here and to experience it, all in full. Thank you very much. Have a great evening, and let's go check out heaven.